Hello, everyone. Professor Stevenson here. A day later, which has thrown off everything. I feel like by the end of yesterday, or by actually some point in the middle of today, I thought, man, I probably should have done some work yesterday because I feel like maybe I've gotten behind. But that's neither here nor there. Welcome to the Monday edition to our weekly wrap up, where the end of the semester is approaching quickly. I am working through this week to comment on your annotated bibliographies. You all are working on commenting on the people in your groups. So hopefully by Friday before midnight, you will have some really awesome comments on your annotated bibs, and you'll be able to revise based on that feedback. So you have some time there. So, and that again is kind of your biggest assignment, and hopefully the turning in a draft and getting some feedback takes some of the stress off of that. So yeah, let's see. Christina's questions were great. One of the things you'll notice is that I didn't offer a lot of textual feedback, and I realized, and I'm going to explain why I did that. Number one, I think Christina's questions were great. I think she guided you all and asked really specific stuff. I think the material this week was kind of asking for you to consider really specific stuff. But then on top of that, I realized pretty last minute, again, I told you I should have worked yesterday because Monday has thrown me for a loop, that I have to record the leader video tonight because the person who's going next week is, or the person who's starting off week 15, discussion 14, dropped the class while into it, and I just didn't pay attention to it. So that's my bad, but that was another side thing. So I wasn't having a long conversation with you in the comments. I know some weeks I do that to some people. I never know where that goes because obviously a lot of times you guys don't really have the ability to write back. But I always have fun like going back and forth with a couple of you every week. And this week, a lot of you just got great job. So my apologies. But you'll be happy to know that I will be leading the discussion. So in just a short while, you'll see that. So Christina's questions were great, and I just want to go through some answers. So Anthony talked about how he really liked the idea of sort of creating some sort of visual aid in the syllabus. I think that was a really big theme through all of this, is that, gosh, the syllabus sucks. And it really does suck in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different people. And every time I read this piece, I'm like, crap, my syllabus sucks and I need to do more. And then I think that's a lot of work. I also like the videos. I think as somebody who teaches online, I try my best to put up video content because I think it's important that we show up in class in this way. That said, the videos are very processy. Like I'm talking into my camera. I didn't reshoot. I didn't edit. I didn't do any of that. And I told you this in the beginning of the semester. But for maybe the humdrum part that Anthony mentions, I would like to have better videos. But some of this stuff just takes time. And so one of the things that's helped me over time is to really kind of design little parts to be accessible, and so that and kind of vamp it every semester so that you're building on a teaching practice as opposed to all of a sudden having to reinvent the wheel. And then obviously if at any point in time your department offers like graphic design workshops, definitely take those on. It always makes me think, I think there's somebody else in the class who said used to work in graphic design. It always makes me think, man, I need like better graphic design skills. I have baby ones, but I need better ones. So Erin talked about improving syllabus, and the fonts. She mentions the serif fonts, he said, as being harder, and recommends sans serif, and trying some of them on an assignment sheet and didn't think that any of them were pleasing to Times New Roman. So then it turned out that that the International Dyslexia, the only serif font was Times New Roman. So yay. And bolding being better than italics or underlining. I don't know. I have a hard time getting rid of underlining, but I get that. Lori, I'm talking about some people's comments from Concept 5. Lori talks about how writing affects her well-being and feeling positive effects and then feeling the negative effects. So definitely the cognitive side of writing, one of the challenges with that. And I try to relay, I don't know if you all do, I try to relay it to my students who are struggling with a writing assignment, is that writing is hard. It's difficult. It's a lot of work. And getting a bad grade back on a paper really stinks and it makes you feel bad. But I always tell them, like, that this isn't about you personally. And alternatively, getting a great grade on a paper can make you feel like you're over the moon too. But the cognitive and sort of emotional part of writing, at the process and the feedback is a struggle. Austin talked about being a student and a teacher and, being flexible, needing to set best intentions, and that the strict attendance policies and the strict deadlines are helpful. And so having to grant, granting, I think that's hard for college, is having to allow a student more time on something as like a general accommodation is difficult. I know, it and a couple of you brought that up, that's perhaps the one you struggle with the most. I know that when we get our process, the way that it works at our university is that a student gives the disability, the DRC, their accommodations, and then the DRC reach out to us as professors. And so if we are able to accommodate them, we'll get, there are a couple of different categories. I don't know if they even allow students more time on homework as a possibility, because normally we'll get, so-and-so needs a note taker, and then this person needs double time on tests, and I don't give tests, so that helps. And we have the people who do give tests can go to the testing center to take the test, as opposed to making the professor stay or providing an alternate space to sit with a proctor. So that helps. And we've talked about this. We have really strict attendance policies that come down from the department level too, is that students can only miss 2 weeks worth of class. And after that, they decide that a student should probably, finish the class in a different semester. And sometimes, we struggle with some of that. I don't think I've ever had a student have this problem for a specific disability, but then again, I constantly have students who have a problem with completing assignments in the time frame for a specific issue that semester. And it could be part of a disability or a mental health problem or something, and all of those things need to be taken seriously. So I know that for me, flexibility is part of my policy. I'm always afraid to write it into the syllabus because I'm worried at a major, large university that students start to take advantage. And maybe and somebody else writes that later. And maybe that is a crazy worry. And I recognize that, but nonetheless, it still is one of my worries. I don't feel like students who go to the DRC to get accommodations will take advantage of what the DRC is accommodating, because I can have a back and forth with the students made anonymous, and I can have a back and forth with them to figure out if what I'm providing for the students is fair or not fair or whatever, because they have they're like the middle ground, and that's actually really helpful. But my worry is if I say I'm really flexible on the syllabus, that students are like, she's really flexible. I say it all the time in class that I'm really flexible. I say, please contact me beforehand if you need help. So, Michelle talked about, she quotes about another modification of this exercise is to ask students to focus on a particular text or website, analyzing not only its accessibility to those with sensory, but also physical and mental disabilities, and have students expand their list of possible accommodations or adaptations to audiences. And she thinks it's a great exercise because websites we don't understand how inaccessible websites can be. Some people don't, they're made for users, but not necessarily for accessibility. And so I think that's one of the ways to hone it into your curriculum. Ethan talked about cooperative language in the syllabus, so that we aren't being thought of as all-knowing, and being able to articulate students' experience and knowledge. He said he wants to see us more as a partnership or a mentorship, and wants to be involved in I want to be involved more in their learning, and including cooperative as the first step in showing students that. I think that's a great point. Andrew talks about having students look at rhetorical strategies, really resonating with him. And seeing more students interact with students with disability once they understand disabilities better. So, being able to help students see the world, in someone else's eyes. Not exactly that, because that can be a really problematic assignment. But yeah. Allie talked again about the accessible syllabus. I think this is a hit. And she talked about the first day of class, making the first day of class more accessible has also been a big hot topic. Yeah, you don't use those words, but having, students being able to send questions and take tests and surveys on the syllabus as you're presenting on it while it's happening. So making it a more interactive experience as opposed to this pretty inaccessible first A would be awesome. Aria talked about kind of what we were talking about above, where the worry of college teachers accommodating students with extra time on something, extra time on work, this is somebody else. Okay. But worried about students who grow up in a really wonderful environment with special ed teachers and IEPs having to go into the college environment and not getting this much, as much in terms of accommodations. And yeah, like I said, the two things I get most frequently are more time on test, which is easy to accommodate students with, and a note taker. I don't get the student needs more time to do the work. I don't get the student needs to get an alternate assignment, because I don't know if I would say it's illegal, but it's definitely probably against college guidelines. And so I already talked about a science teacher writing a fictional memoir for a science paper, and the science teacher grading it, and as great of an example of an accommodation this is in a college classroom, that just, it's hard to make that fly, so that's the question there, is that the community can be bigger, the community can maybe not know those students and have that rhetorical awareness of the situation. So I think that some of these things are a little tricky, but not impossible. And definitely what some of you all touched on in terms of the K through 12 classroom doesn't completely apply and translate in the college composition classroom. And maybe there's a lot of things, and this is maybe the lesson that I've learned all semester, maybe there's a lot of things that we can learn from you all who are teaching K through 12 classes. Dana, so getting back to people talking about naming what we know, Dana talking about how writing certainly affects her. It has the ability to lift her up when she's grieving, allows me to say things I cannot or will not say to anyone, even if I really want to. It gives me permission to vent my fears, my frustrations, my anger in a way that doesn't hurt anyone, including me. It validates my feelings on the page and gives me perspective, if not in the moment. Later on when I reflect, when I meet my students who are struggling with anxiety or making sense of who they are or the world they live in, I have one piece of advice. Do it on paper, in an app, but do it. How else do people figure out who they are? I think that's kind of an awesome thing to think about. Like, sometimes we forget. I'm a writer too, but I forget about that because I'm also a teacher. But, writing has... The reason why I'm here is because writing has been a really seminal thing in my life, and understanding how that works sort of cognitively and emotionally is really important, and how that can work on your students. So I guess that's the other thing to think about, somewhere between accommodation and writing, working on them cognitively or emotionally. Thinking about the subjects you ask students to deal with in class and the ways that they ask them to deal with them, and in what ways those could affect them mentally. In one of the class I'm just teaching a pretty standard, like, annotated bibliography research, something that you don't know a lot about, and then we're gonna, like, this assignment isn't that exciting. It's the assignment after that's the more exciting one. So this one is more of a preparation assignment, but it gets them to think about, it gets them to get their ducks in a row on research and stuff. So it's not my favorite assignment, but at this point it's such a pretty easy paper to grade. And the student proposed a topic. The student themselves came out in the beginning of the semester and said, hey, I'm transitioning. So the student had one name in the beginning of the semester, and at this point they have changed their name. And the student wanted to write about medical coverage for people who are transitioning. And I, in the topic proposal, I was like, that's really fine. Like, maybe this student is really trying to tie their personal life to their research, and because they're going through the process, maybe they don't have a lot of knowledge on it. So maybe this really is an exploratory topic, and they can kind of kill two birds with one stone. So I didn't think about kind of reminding the student that this could be a minefield here mentally. And of course, I'm grading the project, the final version, because they put together a fine rough draft. It wasn't quite complete, which in the class that I was teaching, most of the students didn't quite complete it, but I kind of cheerleaded on the rough draft, like pointed out some ways that, they needed to improve their annotations. And then I said, keep going. Like, this is great work. And of course I get the final, and it's basically the rough draft, and the student has like so much in a comment that they wrote about how this has been physically and emotionally taxing going through this process. And the student was just recently denied medical coverage for their transition, and it's just weighing on this student. And I'm thinking, gosh, I really should have counseled the student to not take up this topic. And so I have to remind myself, if we're going to deal with something hard or difficult or controversial or potentially emotionally taxing, this happened the first semester that I was ever teaching. I didn't think anything of it, but there was this really interesting article in this cultural studies composition reader about these anorexia and bulimia support groups that were helping basically support these girls and continue their eating disorders. They would post like pictures of themselves, and them on a scale and complain about family members who say they needed to get better. And it was a really interesting article. It was one of those kind of like profiles of a really strange community, and the students were writing profiles of a community, so it worked. And of course I had a student that was like, if we're going to talk about this in class, I can't do this. And of course I had like a week of classes to talk about this article because I was doing so much with it. And it was the first ever semester I was teaching, and it was really, 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 really difficult. And I have that burned in the back of my mind that, you know what, Paulette, if you want to do something, if you want to include an article like that, you better get your ducks in a row and understand where the landmines could be. And that has, you know, I don't want to say it's limited my teaching, but that's informed my teaching, is that sometimes asking students to write about certain things can really be difficult. Amy, okay, so it was Amy who was struggling with the modifications of extended of deadline, because, you know, it puts students at like kind of a pyramid of, well, some students are on this and some students are on this. And as a college teacher, that just sounds like a nightmare for me. You know, some of the classes I teach end in 8 weeks, some of them end in 16 weeks. And that just, you know, that just seems like a nightmare for me to have a bunch of students on one track and a bunch of students on another track, especially in a writing class where, you know, we're kind of a workshop class. We're not a, I always have to tell my students in an online class, like, this isn't one of those self-paced classes. You don't get to do it at your pace. Like, there's some stuff you can do early, but you have to stay up with the class and vice versa. Like, you can't fall super far behind. And Amy cites the quote from Womack: studies show that additional time tends to benefit all students, and especially disabled students. If instructors to provide additional time, they face the limits of their schedules in the classroom. I definitely feel this pull. Yes, I should give everyone an extra day to complete a project, for example, but I need to keep moving along in the curriculum I'm supposed to cover in a given trimester. Once I had a parent who is, and so she tells this story about a parent and a student with an IEP who constantly, you know, asked to give extra time, and in the end, probably following the student afterwards, you know, finding out the student was very lazy and motivated because his mom had to fight his battles. But then he found his way in the military. Yeah, I think that's probably an outlier story. But I think, like I said, I talked about earlier, the biggest challenge with the extra time, like, I can get behind every accommodation and every change they talk about in almost every way, except for like my brain breaks when it says extra time. Now, if a single student comes to me and say, I'm having a hard time with X, can you give me extra time? I almost always say yes, unless the student is already failing and like just needs to get out of the course, or the student has asked me at a time when it's impossible, like it's a day my grades are due and everything in the class was supposed to be turned in like 5 days before that, and the student's that late and they're like, I need extra time today. Like, I can't offer that student extra time without jeopardizing, because of the way the grade process works in my college, jeopardizing all the other students. They wouldn't get their final grades, and some of them wouldn't get scholarships and all that good stuff. So yeah, interesting. Ashley talked about naming what we know again, and talking about when she was younger, she had been writing stories for as long as she could remember. However, when she was in the 5th grade, she had severe OCD, so it was a huge struggle to read and write, and writing was so illegible that it was hard for my teacher to grade me fairly. Every time I read a book, I had to read it many times before I registered anything. So in short, I hated writing and reading, but when I was finally get over it and refocused my attention to schoolwork instead of fears, I rediscovered my love for writing and reading. So now, in a sort of ironic way, whatever my focus drifts, I turn to reading or writing to refocus my attention toward my priorities. This is one of the reasons why I would like to teach writing students, including those who may have trouble focusing like I did. Aw, sorry. I thought that was I think that's a great point is, and I think it's just a good, story you tell, and talking about the impact that writing has had in your life. So yeah. Awesome. Well, I am very excited to talk about, and Christina was right, the contingent faculty stuff is this week. So I'm very excited to talk about that. That's, ironically, it's like an issue that I definitely feel strongly on, and you'll hear it come up when I post the discussion leaderboard. So thank you all.